Well, good evening, everyone. This is John Allen, pastor of the Crossroad Baptist Church here in Fall Branch. And I'm coming to you using a live stream. I've never done this before. I've, been posting videos on YouTube and Facebook, but I've never done a full live stream. So it's a new adventure for me. I've been trying to get the kinks worked out here and trying to make sure everything was set to go on our end. But I want to bring to you a thought from the book of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 6. I'll read a couple verses to you. Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 6, it says, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest." You know, I love God's creation. Yeah, I love being outside. I love listening to the birds sing, especially this time of year, one of my favorite times of the year, hearing all the birds chirping and everything and seeing the trees as they start to bud and the flowers as they come up. And I love it. I love living in the mountains where God has blessed us to live. And I know other people, they love the ocean. They love, some like the cornfields and the hay fields, but I love the mountains and I love God's creation. We look in the Bible, many things are used in creation as a teaching tool by God. And one of those things is the little insect known as the ant. And here the writer of the book of Proverbs, which was King Solomon, David's son, was used of the Holy Spirit to write these three little verses about the ant. He said, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise." Before I make some observations about the ant, I'd like to consider this verse and really see what it's saying. The first phrase, first four letters, says, "Go to the ant." Go to the ant. But what does that really mean? Well, just be simply put, it'd be like you're a student, would be going to school. And the ant is the teacher. As Solomon's saying to his son, Rehoboam specifically, he's telling his son, "Go learn from the ant, son." He said, "Go to the ant." He says, "Thou sluggard." Now, I'll get to that phrase here in a moment. "Consider her ways and be wise." You know, it's one thing for a student, and sadly, I must admit, I do this probably different times myself. But it's one thing for a student to go to a classroom and be there in body and not listening to the teacher whatsoever. Maybe it's not, maybe you didn't do that just with your teachers. I know probably many people do that even with their preacher in church. And certainly sometimes we preachers begin to wonder just by the facial expression that some people are giving us. But anyway, it's one thing to go and to just sit there. It's one thing to be in the presence of the teacher, but it's another thing to pay attention to what the teacher is saying. Consider her ways is what Solomon is saying. In other words, don't just go to the ant and let the ant be the teacher, but actually learn the lesson that the ant can teach us. Just like a parent would a parent would tell their child to go to school and listen. They would tell their child, "Pay attention now, don't daydream." And that's what Solomon is saying here. Go to the ant, thou sluggard. Consider her ways. That's what he meant by saying consider her ways. But be wise. Now that's always intrigued me. That little phrase, two little word phrase, be wise. Simply put, in other words, don't just learn the lesson, but put it into practice. Don't just write down notes in a notebook and never do anything with it, but actually learn the subject and apply it to your life. I went through, like many of us, went through school and took many, many notes. I was telling a family member just last night, I had one class in particular while I was in college. I have about two or three 3-inch binders just of notes and worksheets and homework from that one class alone, one semester in college. But it's one thing to take all those notes. It's another thing to apply it to our lives. And same thing, we go to church. It's one thing to sit there and listen to the preacher and get a bunch of notes written down, perhaps in a journal or on a piece of paper. And it's quite another to take what you wrote down and apply it to your own life. But he says, go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Go to class, go listen to the teacher, the ant, learn from her, take notes, but then as you walk away, as you live your life, apply it. Be wise. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways, and be wise. Now, let me give you 6 quick things about an ant that I find quite interesting. There are many more that we could learn from. But 6 things I believe that pertain to us as people, and even so pertain to us as God's children. We find one thing here in this verse 7 of chapter 6. He says, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler. You see, ants truly have no king. Oh, yes, they have their creator, God, but they do not have a governor. They do not have a boss. They do not have a president. They do not have a dictator or a mayor. But yet they still, we see, and many people, many scientists and different people have studied the ants, and obviously we see that King Solomon himself had studied the ant, but we see that they don't really have someone to boss them around all the time. They don't have the ruler who's there cracking the whip, so to speak, to make sure they do their work. But rather, as the verse says following it, provideth her meat in the summer and gathereth her food in the harvest. They don't have someone telling, now, Johnny Ant, you go and you do this, and Susie Ant, you make sure you gather this much today. No, they don't have that. Ants have no ruler. But yet they still have something that God gave them that we would call, for human beings, character. We have that, or they have that which tells them to get up and go to work when there's no one else there to tell them that. There's embedded in them that character that says do right, to do your best, to tell the truth. Ants have no ruler. I'll get back to that in a second. Another thing about ants is that ants work when no other ant is watching. Have you ever stopped and looked at ants? You don't really see them looking out for each or watching each other. You never see an ant just sitting there and then another ant come up on them, and then that first ant just start doing what it should have been doing all along. No, that ant was doing what it should have been doing to begin with. You see, but we as Christians, we're to be that way too. It shouldn't require us in our own lives to have somebody standing cracking the whip over us just to get us to do right. It shouldn't require, really, someone standing over us to make us do what we're supposed to do for God. Another thing about ants is that they say they've determined, different uh, students of the ant and scientists and different people, they've determined that an ant can lift and carry 10 to 50 times its own weight. Imagine that. 10 to 50 times its own weight. Most people, probably myself included, couldn't even carry my own weight, this, let alone 10 to 50 times that. But yet ants, they say, can. You say, what's the significance of that, preacher? You know, with God's help, God's children can carry 10 to 50 times the load than what we would even expect. But people look at us and they wonder, how in the world are you taking what you're taking? How in the world are you dealing with what you're dealing with? How in the world are you handling that heartache and that trouble? You turn around and you say, I don't know, apart from God. Why? Because God will give that strength. You know, another thing about ants, this one surprised me. I mean, I never really truly examined an ant under a microscope and looked for this, but I found it interesting. They say ants do not have ears. Ants don't have ears. And they have discovered that ants can hear, but not in the way we do, where we hear audible sounds, but they can sense vibrations through their legs. The vibration on the floor, that whatever surface they're climbing. And that's how they hear. But you know, I took stock in that and I consider that, as the verse says. We can apply that unto us. You know, if we're going to learn from the ant, we need to learn where to get our signals from. We need to learn where we get our communication from. You know, too many of us, myself included, no doubt, we're too busy listening to what everybody in the world says. But yet, I'll tell you, I found this part interesting too. You know where the ant senses the vibrations from? You know the location of it? It wasn't just the legs, but rather right there at the knees. And I'll tell you where we ought to be getting our signals from. And that's down on our knees in prayer. Oh, I fear that so many people, but perhaps it's just because it's human nature. Perhaps it's just because it's part of the old man, that we're so consumed about hearing about what everybody thinks. That's all we care about. You know, we seek to find our own praise, and we seek to find, we want to hear that good news. We want to hear someone bragging on us, even though the Bible clearly teaches against doing that. Let us be the ant, as the ant who doesn't have ears to hear what everybody else is doing, but rather can only sense what's going on around them through the vibrations that occur from the surface they're upon. And of course, that for us would be in prayer. You know, another thing about ants, they've discovered that ants have specific jobs, that they all do what they're supposed to do. And that's what they're made to do. But just as an ant has a specific job in their colony, as we'll look at in a moment, so do we. We all have specific jobs. We each have a specific purpose for which God made us. We each have a specific task. It does not matter who you are, where you were born, who your family is or was. God has a purpose designed specifically for you. And wherever you are, however you're watching this tonight, God has something specifically for you to do, just like He does the tiny, even bothersome ant in our eyes. Just as they have their own job, so do you. You say, oh, I feel like I'm insignificant. You feel you're insignificant. What about an ant? That's the spider, or not the spider, that's the critter, the insect that a lot of people think, take no second thought to step on and kill. And I don't think anybody's going around stepping on you. God has a purpose for you, my friend. God has a plan for you. And one of those great plans is for you to be the object of His love. And for you to be the recipient of His amazing, glorious, and free gift of salvation. You say, oh, you don't know what I've done. It does not matter in God's eyes, because salvation has never been based upon what man could do, but only what Christ has done. But then the last thing we find, and all that to get to what I'm saying now, ants work together as a colony. It's not every ant for itself. Oh, yes. You as well as I have seen a lone ant going around somewhere. But that ant has always been part of a colony. That ant is not just a loner somewhere. But don't you think we're supposed to be the same way? Ants will work together. Yes, they may have their individual tasks. As I said a moment ago, they have their specific jobs, but they're working together, not just for their own sake, but for the sake of the colony as a whole. Now consider this. Here is truly where the thought of this lesson came from. Right now, our world is facing the coronavirus pandemic. And I need not remind you of it. It's no newsflash to any of us. However, there's been created a division in the U.S. and perhaps even in other places around the world that some want to work together, some just want to do what they want to do. Some will have been looking at the mandated shutdowns of businesses and restaurants and even churches as an attack on our liberties here in the U.S. And some have been thankful for it. Now, let me tell you what the Bible teaches. It says, go to the ant, thou sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. And there's one thing about an ant, is that they're always working with another ant for the better of the entire colony. So here's what we can do right now. As a nation, as a world, as a human race, let's work together. I'll be honest, and forgive me for being this frank and bold about this, but it personally upsets me and disturbs me when I hear about churches and preachers and individuals who are taking all this lightly. Sure, we've seen many more things severe, but the point of the matter is right now, we need to prove that we can work together. And we need to work together. If you're a preacher, a pastor of a church, and you're watching this or will watch this, you realize your community is watching to see how you handle this. And when we get through this, you may not have a church because the community wants nothing to do with you if you handle this wrong. The same thing for families, the same thing for business, same thing for school. And I'm not advocating necessarily that our liberties be taken away, because they're not. This is a government and our authorities and our leaders using their whole purpose for government, that's to protect our person, protect our property, and to protect our freedom. It's the only reasons for government, according to the Bible. And all they're trying to do is protect us. So let's work together. Let's work together as a community. But it doesn't just stop there. What about working together in marriage? My wife and I, if you know us, you know my wife and I have only been married a little over 8 months, and been the happiest 8 months of my life. But one thing I have learned, and I knew this before, but I've really learned by what little experience I have, is that marriage is not 50-50. Marriage is not 25-75. Marriage is 100% all the time. You got to work together. Same thing for a family. Families have to work together in order to make it work. Not just a family, what about church family? They have to work together. I've been in many, many churches. Some of you watching this have been in more churches than I have. And perhaps you've seen it more than I have, what I'm about to say. But I've seen a lot of families in churches who only cared about their own family. And that's not right, friend. Yes, that man, the father, is to protect his family ultimately. But to care only about his own family and not try to help the others, and not trying to teach his children to work together with other people, all that does is cause a church split. All that does is cause Satan to be happy. That's not Bible. Let's work together as a church. And as I've already alluded to, let's work together as a community. And then as a human race. It's sad that, in my opinion, we have to have mandates from our authorities to get us to work together. And I know some governors are trying to do it without it, and that's up to their discretion. And I'm not saying yay or nay about that. I am saying that regardless, we ought to be working together. And not just to get through this pandemic, but to get through life itself. And the church ought to be working together to bring glory to God, and the family and the marriage just as the end. But I told you I'd come back to that second phrase. Solomon said, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard." What does that mean, preacher? Thou sluggard. Well, The term lazy is connected with it, the word lazy. But it's not just lazy. There's something I believe about the word sluggard that is an even harsher and more demeaning term than even the word lazy. You see, the sluggard person is not just a lazy person. You know, we think about a person who doesn't want to work, and we think about a person who, you know, just sits around, does nothing, and when they can do something. But rather, there's something about the attitude and the heart and the spirit about the sluggard that makes him a sluggard. What's that? Their stubbornness and unwillingness to do what they're supposed to do. Their indifference to right, their indifference to truth, their indifference to other people. They're the ones who you observe and who have that attitude of like, oh, well, what does it matter? I don't care what you say. I'm going to do what I want to do. Oh, I want to, you know, go play ball when the mandate is out. I'm going to go play ball. I'm going to get in a crowd when I should be at home. I don't care. I'm going to do what I want to do. That's the sluggard attitude, tied with laziness. They're indifferent to move. Why? It's all about them. It's all about them. And you know people like that. I don't have anybody in mind when I say this, but no doubt there are saved people and lost people like that. There are people who sit in a pew and men who stand from behind the pulpit. All of the same spirit and attitude of the sluggard. But yet Solomon said, go to the ant, thou sluggard. It was a plea. It was a challenge. And it was a command. Now I ask you, as I ask myself, are we going to learn from the ant? Especially in the time that we're facing now? Are we going to learn to work together? Are we going to learn to work together in our marriage and in our family, in our churches, and in our communities, and in the nation, and even the human race, the worldwide? Are we going to learn to stand strong? Are we going to learn to get our orders from God above through prayer? And are we going to learn to get our approval from God through prayer rather than just hoping and praying, or not necessarily praying, but hoping and desiring that someone would come and brag on us and praise us? We're going to be like the ant. Go to the ant. Go to the ant, the sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. Now you tell me, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Well, I pray that was a blessing to you. And I hope that you'll be able to take that and apply it to your own life and what you need to, and as I try to mine. And if there's anything you got out of it, may just be one thing. Let's work together for our community, for our families, for our church people, for our marriage, for the better of those around us. I love you. Sure do miss you, church. May God bless you.